The room was pitch black, suffocating me with its oppressive silence. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as if it were trying to escape the chaos that surrounded me. Shadows danced across the walls, their movements unpredictable and menacing, like specters waiting to pounce. Every creak of the floorboards beneath me felt like a warning, a signal that something sinister was lurking just out of sight. My breath hitched as I heard faint whispers, barely audible but unmistakably real. "Hide!" the voice hissed urgently. "Don't let them find you." I froze, my body trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't just the darkness that terrified me. It was the feeling of being watched. Those unseen eyes seemed to pierce through my very soul, paralyzing me with fear. The air grew heavier by the second, pressing down on me until I thought I might collapse. And then came the sounds. Scuffling under the bed, shuffling behind the door, footsteps pacing back and forth. Each noise sharper, closer, more deliberate than the last. Was someone or something closing in? Suddenly, the lights flickered on, blinding me momentarily. When my vision adjusted, I gasped in horror at what lay before me. A group of strangers stood scattered around the room, their faces pale and wide-eyed. They all looked at me with desperation, their expressions mirroring the panic clawing at my insides. Before I could ask who they were or why they were here, one of them stepped forward, his voice shaking but determined. "Lucy," he said almost pleadingly. "I'm Mike, from work. We've been seeing each other." My jaw dropped. Seeing each other? What did he mean? But before I could respond, another man emerged from the shadows near the closet. He flexed his arms nervously, clearly trying to exude confidence despite the absurdity of the situation. "Ethan," he announced, "from the gym. You know how much time we've spent together. This isn't a joke. It's serious." His tone carried a mix of arrogance and vulnerability, leaving me even more confused. And then there was a third figure, clutching an old notebook tightly against his chest. His hands trembled as he held it out toward me. "Alex," he stammered, "from school. Do you remember me now?" His voice cracked, betraying the weight of unspoken memories buried deep within those pages. As they spoke over one another, vying for my attention, I realized the gravity of the moment. These men weren't random intruders. They were fragments of my past, pieces of relationships I had long forgotten or ignored. Yet here they were, standing in my living room, claiming to love me. The room spun around me, the walls closing in as the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. Who were these people? Why were they here? And most importantly, how had everything spiraled so far out of control? The chaos in the room reached a fever pitch as the three men, one by one, emerged from different corners, each claiming to be Lucy's lover. Their entrances were as dramatic as they were absurd, adding layers of tension and confusion to an already volatile situation. First came Mike Lover, striding into the room in a perfectly tailored suit that screamed professionalism. But his polished appearance couldn't mask the sheer terror etched onto his face. His knuckles were white as he clutched a sleek leather briefcase, which he placed on the coffee table with exaggerated care. "Lucy," he began, his voice trembling but resolute. "I've brought everything we need to fix this." He opened the case dramatically, revealing stacks of documents labeled confidential and top secret. It was clear Mike believed these papers held some kind of salvation for their predicament. But instead of clarity, all they did was deepen the mystery. The others stared at him blankly, while Lucy looked utterly bewildered. What is this?" she stammered, pointing at the files. Before Mike could explain, Ethan burst through the doorway, shattering whatever fragile composure remained. Ethan Lover entered like a storm, flexing his biceps and holding a small dumbbell in one hand as if it were a weapon. "Step aside," he barked, glaring at Mike. "You think your boring office crap can win Lucy over? She needs someone strong, someone who can protect her." His bravado might have been convincing, if not for the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. When Charles, Lucy's husband, appeared moments later with a menacing glare, Ethan's confidence crumbled instantly. "Oh, God," he muttered, backing away awkwardly before diving headfirst into the bathtub. The sound of splashing water echoed through the room, followed by Ethan's muffled cries of, "Don't look at me!" Just when it seemed things couldn't get any stranger, Alex Lover shuffled in, clutching a tattered notebook to his chest. His eyes were red-rimmed, tears streaming down his cheeks as he approached Lucy. "Please," he begged, thrusting the book toward her. "Read this. It's everything I've ever felt about you. Every letter, every poem." He flipped open the notebook, revealing pages filled with juvenile scribbles and heartfelt declarations of love. "Remember middle school? We sat next to each other in homeroom." Alex sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to the hope that Lucy would recall their shared past. But Lucy simply blinked at him, her expression a mix of pity and bewilderment. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but I don't remember you." As the three men argued over whose claim to Lucy was more legitimate, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Mike waved his documents around frantically, insisting his meticulous planning made him the better choice. Ethan, still dripping wet from his impromptu bath escape, tried to assert dominance by brandishing his dumbbell again. Meanwhile, Alex collapsed onto the floor, rocking back and forth as he muttered, "She forgot me. How could she forget me?" Charles stood silently in the corner, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. His piercing gaze swept across the room, taking in the spectacle of three men vying for his wife's affection. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Enough," he growled. "Who are you people, and why are you in my house?" The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered as the absurdity of the situation sank in. Each man had come prepared to prove his worth, but none of them had anticipated the sheer insanity unfolding around them. The already chaotic scene reached a boiling point when Charles, Lucy's husband, stormed into the room. His face was flushed with rage, veins visibly pulsing on his temples as he clutched a golf club in one hand like a weapon of justice. The wooden floor creaked under his heavy footsteps, each step amplifying the tension that had been simmering since Mike, Ethan, and Alex revealed themselves. Charles scanned the room with piercing eyes, his gaze landing first on Mike's trembling frame, then on Ethan dripping wet from his ill-fated bathtub escape, and finally on Alex, who sat hunched over his tattered notebook, sobbing uncontrollably. "What is this circus?" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Without waiting for an answer, Charles turned to Mike, jabbing the end of the golf club toward him. "You," he snapped, his tone laced with venom. "Who do you think you are? Do you honestly believe your little briefcase full of nonsense makes you worthy of my wife?" Mike stammered, clutching his documents tightly to his chest as if they could shield him from Charles's wrath. "Sir, I can explain," he managed to choke out, but Charles cut him off with a derisive laugh. "Explain what? That you're some office drone trying to play hero? Please." He swung the golf club menacingly, forcing Mike to stumble backward. Next, Charles rounded on Ethan, who was still awkwardly perched near the bathtub. "And you? he growled, pointing the club at Ethan's damp figure. Do you really think flexing your muscles and waving around that ridiculous dumbbell impresses anyone? What kind of idiot hides in a bathtub? Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself, but quickly closed it again, shrinking under Charles's glare. I, uh, he muttered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Charles snorted dismissively. Pathetic. Finally, Charles turned his attention to Alex, whose tear-streaked face only seemed to infuriate him further. And let me guess, you're the sentimental type? He sneered, gesturing at the worn notebook in Alex's hands. Poems and love letters? Spare me the drama. Alex looked up at him, tears streaming down his cheeks. It's not just drama, he whispered hoarsely. She meant everything to me. Before he could finish, Charles interrupted with a bark of laughter. Meant, past tense, face it, buddy, she doesn't even remember you. With each confrontation, the atmosphere grew more volatile. Charles paced back and forth, gripping the golf club so tightly his knuckles turned white. All of you listen carefully, he said, his voice cold and calculated. If none of you leave this house within the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. I don't care how embarrassing or messy this gets. I'll make sure every last one of you regrets stepping foot in here. His threat hung heavily in the air, silencing the room momentarily. But before anyone could react, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. A new figure stepped inside. A man dressed in a sharp suit, exuding an air of calm authority. Patrick, he introduced himself smoothly, surveying the chaos with a raised eyebrow. Mind telling me what's going on here? His unexpected arrival threw everyone off balance, including Charles, who lowered the golf club slightly as confusion flickered across his face. Who the hell are you? Charles demanded, suspicion creeping into his voice. Patrick smiled faintly, unfazed by the hostility surrounding him. Just a concerned observer, he replied cryptically. Though I must say, this is quite the spectacle. As Patrick took a seat uninvited, the dynamic shifted yet again. No longer was Charles the sole figure of authority. Now, there was another player in this twisted game, adding a layer of complexity no one anticipated. The tension in the room thickened, promising even greater turmoil ahead. The tension in the room escalated to an almost unbearable level as accusations flew like daggers between the men. Each word was laced with venom, each sentence a calculated attempt to shift blame onto someone else. This is your fault, Mike shouted at Ethan, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. If you hadn't barged in here with that ridiculous dumbbell, none of this would have happened. Ethan retaliated instantly, his face flushed with anger. My fault. You're the one waving around those useless papers like they mean something. Face it, you're just a pathetic office drone trying to play hero. Before either could cool down, fists clenched and tempers flared into physical confrontation. Mike lunged at Ethan, knocking over a lamp in the process. The crash echoed through the house, followed by the sound of shattering glass as Ethan stumbled backward into a side table. Stop it, both of you, Lucy screamed, her voice drowned out by their shouts. But her plea went unheard. They were too consumed by rage to care. As they grappled with each other, furniture toppled, picture frames fell from the walls, and chaos reigned supreme. Meanwhile, Alex sat frozen on the floor, clutching his notebook tightly, tears streaming down his cheeks. Overwhelmed by guilt and fear, he tried to make himself invisible. But fate had other plans. In a moment of panic, he dropped the notebook, its pages scattering across the floor. One particular page landed directly at Charles's feet. He picked it up, scanning the juvenile handwriting filled with declarations of love for Lucy. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened until it seemed ready to crack. "What is this garbage?" he roared, holding up the crumpled paper for everyone to see. "Are you seriously telling me this is what passes for romance?" The sudden outburst startled even Mike and Ethan, who paused mid-fight to glance nervously at Charles. Alex, however, couldn't handle the scrutiny. "It's not garbage," he cried, his voice trembling. "That's how I felt about her. That's everything I've ever wanted to say." But his heartfelt defense only fueled Charles's fury further. "How dare you defile my marriage with your childish nonsense?" Charles bellowed, throwing the paper back onto the floor. Amidst the escalating chaos, the air grew thick with panic. Footsteps thundered through the halls as people darted between rooms, searching for places to hide or escape. Lucy's screams mingled with Patrick's calm but unsettling commentary. Fascinating. Truly fascinating. The noise reached a deafening crescendo. Shouts, crashes, and the occasional sob creating a symphony of madness. It felt as though the very foundation of the house was trembling, threatening to collapse under the weight of so much unresolved tension. Just as the chaos in the house seemed to reach its zenith, a new figure entered the fray. Father, the local priest. Clad in his immaculate clerical robes, he strode into the room with an air of authority that momentarily silenced the cacophony. His stern expression and upright posture suggested he was prepared to restore order, but the bewildered glint in his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. "Lucy," he called out, his voice firm yet tinged with exasperation. "You missed confession today. Is this why you've resorted to such madness?" His words hung in the air, unanswered, as everyone turned their attention to him. For a brief moment, it seemed as though his presence might calm the storm. But Father quickly realized the futility of his hopes. The room erupted again into shouting and accusations, each person trying to drown out the others. Undeterred, Father raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Enough!" he bellowed, his deep voice cutting through the noise like a gavel. "This is not how we resolve matters. Repentance, faithfulness, humility, these are the virtues you need." But his sermon fell on deaf ears. Mike scoffed loudly, clutching his briefcase tighter. "Repentance? You think these papers aren't enough evidence of my devotion?" Ethan rolled his eyes, still holding his dumbbell defensively. "And what about loyalty? Shouldn't she choose someone who can actually protect her?" Alex, meanwhile, sat sobbing quietly, cradling his notebook as if it were a lifeline. Even Charles, gripping his golf club menacingly, shot the priest a glare that screamed skepticism. Unfazed by their indifference, Father pressed on. "If none of you will listen, then perhaps you should all hide until you come to your senses." With surprising conviction, he pointed toward the bed. "Under there. Go now. It's for your own safety." To everyone's astonishment, Father himself dropped to his knees and crawled beneath the bed frame, disappearing from view. His sudden act of self-preservation caught everyone off guard, adding another layer of absurdity to the already surreal scene. "Did he just—" Ethan began, staring at the space where Father had vanished. Before anyone could respond, Lucy let out a frustrated scream. "This is insane, all of you. Are you even real? Or am I losing my mind?" Her voice cracked under the strain, tears streaming down her face. Mike stepped forward hesitantly, attempting to comfort her. "Lucy, please, no." Charles interrupted, brandishing his golf club once more. Stay away from her! The tension escalated further when Patrick chimed in from across the room. Well, well, he said dryly, leaning against the wall with a smirk. Even the man of God has abandoned ship. What does that say about the rest of us? His casual tone only infuriated Charles more. Shut up, Charles snapped. You don't belong here anyway. As the argument raged on, strange sounds echoed from under the bed, muffled prayers and muttered pleas for divine intervention. Dear Lord, Father whispered audibly, deliver me from this nightmare. His voice trailed off, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. It was almost comical how the very person meant to offer guidance had become part of the problem, cowering alongside those he sought to counsel. The absurdity of the situation reached new heights when Ethan, unable to resist mocking the priest, leaned down and peered under the bed. Hey, Father, he taunted, grinning wickedly. Any miracles left in there for us? Father's response was muffled but unmistakably sharp. Son, if you don't step away from me, I'll make sure you regret it. For a fleeting moment, the absurdity of it all struck Lucy like a thunderbolt. Here they were, a priest hiding under a bed, 3 men claiming to love her, her furious husband wielding a golf club, and a mysterious observer smirking in the corner. Nothing made sense anymore. Yet somehow, amidst the madness, one thing became clear. This night was far from over. Amidst the escalating chaos, a new figure entered the scene, Patrick. A man whose calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the madness unfolding around him. Dressed in a sleek black suit that exuded sophistication, he moved with purpose, his expression unreadable yet oddly unsettling. As everyone else shouted over one another or scrambled for cover, Patrick simply stood there, observing the spectacle with detached curiosity. Fascinating, he murmured under his breath, adjusting his cuffs as if attending a formal gathering rather than a house on the verge of collapse. When Charles noticed him lingering by the doorway, suspicion immediately flared in his eyes. Who the hell are you? He demanded, gripping his golf club tighter. Patrick raised an eyebrow, unfazed by the hostility directed at him. Introductions, he said smoothly, stepping further into the room. I'm Patrick. Let's just say I'm an observer here to document this intriguing story. His tone was light, almost mocking, as though the entire situation amused him. His words only fueled Charles's frustration. Document? What kind of nonsense is that? This isn't some TV show. Patrick chuckled softly, his lips curling into a sly smile. Isn't it, though? Look at all of you. 3 men claiming to love Lucy, a priest hiding under the bed, and her husband wielding a golf club like it's a weapon. If anything, this is the clearest proof of how messy love can get. Mike, who had been trying and failing to assert his authority, turned to glare at Patrick. Messy? You think this is funny? We're dealing with real feelings here. Patrick shrugged nonchalantly. Oh, trust me, I understand. But let's be honest. None of you have handled this particularly well, have you? His sharp observation silenced Mike momentarily, leaving him fuming but unable to retort. Ethan, still clutching his dumbbell defensively, stepped forward. What do you know about handling anything? You're not even part of this. Patrick tilted his head, studying Ethan with a calculating gaze. True, but sometimes the best perspective comes from those on the outside. And honestly, your attempts at intimidation are rather amusing. Before Ethan could respond, Charles interjected, his voice dripping with skepticism. If you're so clever, then tell me, what do you know about Lucy? About our marriage? Patrick hesitated for the first time, his confident facade faltering slightly. After a brief pause, he admitted, Nothing, actually. I don't know her. I've never met her before today. The admission sparked outrage among the group. You mean you barged into someone else's drama without even knowing them? Alex cried out, his voice trembling with disbelief. Patrick nodded casually, as if it were no big deal. Exactly. Sometimes life throws you into situations you didn't ask for. Consider me a participant by chance. Intrigued, but ultimately uninvolved. The absurdity of Patrick's presence added another layer of tension to the already volatile atmosphere. Lucy, who had remained silent throughout much of the argument, finally spoke up. So what are you doing here then? Why are you watching us like we're some kind of experiment? Her voice carried both anger and exhaustion, reflecting the emotional toll of the night. Patrick met her gaze evenly, his expression softening ever so slightly. Because, Lucy, stories like yours remind us how fragile human connections can be. Love, loyalty, betrayal, they're all threads in the same tangled web. And tonight, he gestured toward the chaos surrounding them. Tonight is a masterpiece of dysfunction. His poetic analysis did little to soothe the group. Instead, it seemed to amplify their frustrations. Charles tightened his grip on the golf club, glaring daggers at Patrick. Enough with your philosophical garbage. You're useless here. Patrick smirked, clearly enjoying the reaction he provoked. Perhaps. But useless people often make the best observers. As the shouting resumed, Father's muffled prayers continued to echo faintly from beneath the bed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Patrick, whose enigmatic smile suggested he knew exactly how absurd everything had become. The chaos reached its breaking point when one of the men, no one could later recall who, suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs, "I'm going to kill all of you!" The room erupted into pandemonium. Mike dropped his briefcase, scattering papers everywhere as he scrambled toward the door. Ethan, still clutching his dumbbell like a lifeline, tripped over a chair and fell flat on his face. Alex, sobbing uncontrollably, curled up in a corner with his notebook pressed against his chest, muttering prayers under his breath. Even Father, who had been hiding under the bed, crawled out only to dive behind the couch. Charles, gripping his golf club tightly, swung it wildly in an attempt to assert control. "Stop moving!" he bellowed, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of screams and crashing furniture. Lucy stood frozen in the center of the room, her wide eyes darting between the panicked figures around her. It was then that the front door burst open, and a police officer strode in, baton in hand and flashlight illuminating the scene. "Everyone sit down now," the officer commanded, his authoritative tone cutting through the noise. But instead of compliance, confusion reigned. There were too many people, too much shouting, and far too little space for logic to prevail. Patrick, ever the observer, leaned casually against the wall, watching the spectacle unfold with an amused smirk. "Well," he remarked dryly, "this is certainly escalating." The officer blinked, clearly overwhelmed. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his gaze shifting from Charles brandishing his golf club to Ethan lying sprawled on the floor. Before anyone could answer, Lucy stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Her voice trembled with fury and exhaustion. "All of you, you're insane! she shrieked, pointing accusingly at each person in turn. How did this even happen? Who are you people? Her words hung in the air unanswered as the weight of the absurdity finally crashed down on everyone. Mike looked at her guiltily, his meticulously prepared documents now scattered across the floor. Ethan struggled to his feet, his bravado completely shattered. Alex continued to rock back and forth, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Even Charles lowered his golf club slightly, his anger giving way to bewilderment. Before anyone could respond further, Lucy's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor in a faint. The room fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the occasional sniffle. The officer sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "All right, folks," he said wearily. "Someone better start explaining before I lose my mind, too." As the group hesitated, Patrick chuckled softly, earning glares from nearly everyone. "Don't look at me," he said innocently. "I'm just here for the show." His comment broke the tension momentarily, eliciting a groan from Charles and a muffled laugh from Ethan. Yet despite the fleeting levity, the reality remained. They were trapped in a surreal nightmare of their own making. At its core, this chaotic tale is more than just a farcical exploration of human relationships. It's a poignant commentary on the fragility of trust and honesty in love. Each character, driven by their own desires and insecurities, becomes entangled in an absurd whirlwind that spirals further out of control with every misguided action. Mike's meticulous documents, Ethan's desperate flexing, Alex's tear-stained notebook, all are symbols of misplaced efforts to claim Lucy's affection, yet none of them succeed. Instead, they expose the cracks in their own facades, revealing how dishonesty and selfishness corrode even the most sincere intentions. The climax of the story underscores this theme. When emotions override reason, chaos inevitably follows. Charles' fury, fueled by betrayal, blinds him to any possibility of resolution. The priest's futile attempt to preach repentance underlines the futility of seeking redemption amidst such disarray. Even Patrick, the detached observer, serves as a mirror reflecting the group's collective descent into madness, a reminder that logic often crumbles when passions run unchecked. Ultimately, the narrative delivers a chilling message. Failure to master one's emotions and actions leads only to tragedy. Lucy's fainting spell symbolizes the collapse of hope in a situation where everyone prioritized their egos over empathy. The arrival of the police officer, though comedic, highlights the real-world consequences of reckless behavior. By the end, no one emerges unscathed. Each person is left grappling with the wreckage of their choices, forced to confront the harsh truth that love cannot thrive without transparency and mutual respect. This story warns us all. Unchecked impulses can unravel lives, turning what could have been meaningful connections into a circus of regret. In the end, it's not monsters or external forces that destroy these characters. It's their inability to rise above their flaws. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.